Okay, so it's wonderful to be here at the Shabja Entrepreneurship Festival. I've had the pleasure of joining many times. My name is Dina Sherif, and I'm the Executive Director of the MIT Legatum Center for Development Entrepreneurship. Um, I'm also maybe in the Middle East known as the co-founder of Ahead of the Curve and former founder of the Entrepreneurship Center at the American University in Cairo. So I'm very excited to have an amazing group of panelists with me today to talk about what's been happening in the MENA region over the past decade. Um, I'm lucky to have witnessed, and I'm sure Layla, you as well, from afar, the tremendous growth in the innovation and entrepreneurship ecosystem that's been happening over the past decade in the region. And I think with everything that's happening in the global pandemic today, it's important to kind of take a pause and think about where we are and where we want this ecosystem to go over the upcoming years. We've seen some very positive trends happen over the years, some what I would consider very significant exits, like the Kareem exit or acquisition by Uber for over $3 billion, the recent IPO of Fawry, which is Egypt's first fintech company, for over $1 billion US. And then if we even think a little bit back further, Yahoo's acquisition of Maktub, which is what I consider to be one of the beginning stories of the entrepreneurship and innovation ecosystem in the region. So we're excited to talk about what might come. And we have with us Professor Fiona Murray, who is my boss, but also Associate Dean of Innovation and Inclusion at MIT Sloan. Fiona is also serves as the British Prime Minister's Council on Science and Technology. We also have Efosa Ojomo. Efosa has become a very dear friend. He works at the Christensen Institute and is co-author of The Prosperity Paradox, along with Clay Christensen. Very eager to talk about that as well today. And then of course we have Layla Shaikley, who is an MIT alum and also co-founder of an amazing, well, not really startup anymore, company called Wise Systems. I know that Layla also enjoys dabbling in a lot of other things such as fashion, design, and is also an amazing mother and someone I've known for quite some time. So I want to hop right into it, unless there's anything else you guys would like to add about yourselves for the audience. But otherwise, I'd like to go right in with the first question. So, you know, across the region, and I'm going to address this to Fiona, across the region, we've had a lot of cities like Cairo, Dubai, sometimes Amman and Jordan, compete with each other about who is the innovation hub. Everyone wants to take claim to being the innovation hub, a place where startups are not only starting, but thriving. But what we're seeing, unfortunately, is in the midst of this competition, not very much collaboration. And in my opinion, this is holding our ecosystem back. While the region is vast, as we know, and Fiona, I think you know this because you've lived the region very much vicariously through me over the past year. Our region is huge, but what we've seen is that entrepreneurship and innovation seems to be concentrated in very few cities, all of which are detached from each other. So the question I have for you is, how can we see more collaboration take place from your experience? And especially coming out of COVID, how can we see some of these new hubs that have emerged in the region connect more deeply so that we can see businesses grow and scale at the level that we need to create the jobs that we need for the region?
First, Dina, thank you. And I'm really delighted to be part of this conversation and incredibly pleased to continue our conversations about the MENA region. It seems to me that if we look around the world and try to think about some of the places that we can both learn from when we think about innovation ecosystems and the role of entrepreneurship in really helping to drive the sort of prosperity and well-being that we need, there's actually a lot we can learn from the MENA region. And I hope there's a lot we can share from our experiences in other places. So first, I think it's important to say that if we were having a conversation like this about high growth companies, their role in the economy, job creation, you know, even a decade ago, I think we would have been talking about Silicon Valley and we'd have been talking about Boston. and the rest of the list would have been incredibly short. And I think one of the things that has been transformative in the last decade is really just the number of places that are emerging. And whether it be other cities in the United States like Pittsburgh, whether it be Europe, London, Paris, whether it be in the MENA region, Dubai, Cairo, parts of sub-Saharan Africa, or whether we move further east, Singapore, New Taipei City. And I think we've seen that without, in fact, seeing any sort of loss of momentum in some of the major existing ecosystems. So I think just as an existence proof, we can really see that happening. So we know, in fact, that when we can get these dynamics to work, actually everybody is better off. I think there are a couple of models of collaboration that we've often seen. One is a sort of hub and spoke model. So think about, the big city in the middle and other places that sort of align around it. Almost like sort of moons around a planet. And sometimes Silicon Valley feels a bit like that, Boston, with respect to cities like Worcester and Providence. I think a different model is also a more differentiated one, a sort of supply chain, different pieces of the supply chain in a particular industry or sector. But I think the model that I think is perhaps most interesting is really to have a conversation and to start to think about, as we take a region in the broader sense, and something as large as the MENA region, for every particular place or city to sort of recognize that we do need some economies of scale, but also that we actually need to think about our comparative advantage. And so a city like Cairo and the entrepreneurs there, have certain kinds of advantages, access to, really large markets right there. So that you have the opportunity to deploy certain things at scale very quickly. Somewhere like Dubai, probably very specific types of capital and sophistication in capital. And so I think we have to sort of think about some of the specialized resources and some of the real advantage that some of these particular regions bring to the table. Because if each particular city or ecosystem can think about its advantage, then I think what we can start to see is sort of agglomeration around those things, but where what we're all doing is really highly complementary. And so we're not actually trying to compete, although of course we're competing over the most talented people and capital, because those things are a little bit indivisible. I think actually if one company is successful, what you tend to see is you're actually training and encouraging more people, and those people spill over and some of them go to the nearby city because they're going to do something complementary but different. And so I think we have to focus on comparative advantage, which I think very quickly means that we have to focus on more than just entrepreneurship. We have to really think about innovation-driven entrepreneurship. And so we have to think about how we connect what we're doing to science, to technology, to new innovations, to new approaches, and solving big, important problems.
I think that's a great segue. I do want to come back to you for a follow-up, but that is a great segue to Efosa, because I think when we think about entrepreneurship in the Middle East, we really don't focus enough on the innovation side of it. And Efosa, you co-wrote this book called The Prosperity Paradox, and in it you talk about the role of innovation in leading us to prosperity and solving major problems. The Arab region is home to one of the largest populations of youth in the world. We're also home to one of the largest youth unemployment rates. We have high levels of poverty, issues related to quality healthcare, quality education, issues related to access. Our challenges are numerous, but those are also, as you and I know, huge opportunities for innovation. How can we think about applying the market creating innovation theory that you and Professor Christensen put forth in the book to the Arab region? And what would you have to say to a lot of the entrepreneurs who are watching this panel?
Yeah, thanks a lot, Dina. It really is a pleasure to be here. And I just want to say, Layla and Professor Murray, it's an honor to just serve on this panel with you both. As I was listening to Professor Murray, it occurred to me how simple the idea she proposed was when I thought about New York and Silicon Valley. Can you imagine if Silicon Valley decided we want to be sort of like the Wall Street of the world, right? It wouldn't make sense. The advantage they have there is different. I actually never thought about that. So I think that's a brilliant point.
She is quite brilliant, I agree.
Yeah. And just the simplicity of it, the simplicity was amazing. It never occurred to me that way. But I think, you raise an important point, Dina. The kinds of innovation we have to focus on in the region has to be, or the kinds of entrepreneurship has to be innovation driven. But I want to just step back and really define the term, because innovation means different things to different people. From the standpoint of economic development, really, we play around with three types of innovations, typically. The first type are what we call efficiency innovations. These are innovations that help you make products cheaper. And so when a company outsources operations from one region to another to take advantage of wages or things like that, it's an efficiency type innovation. That tends to not have a huge impact on a huge long-term impact on development and prosperity creation. The second type of innovation are sustaining innovations. These are innovations that make good products better. And so think about your smartphones when you get a new phone and a new camera or a faster processor, or you get a new car and you've got heated seats and adaptive cruise control. Now, these are innovations that target the existing consumers, the existing market, and are substitutive in character, right? So if you think about the manufacturers of a new car, they don't necessarily need to create an entirely new manufacturing plant, supply chain, distribution, retail to sell a car with heated seats, for example. But these are also important types of innovations. The third type, which is what our research tends to focus a lot on, are market creating innovations. These are innovations that transform complicated and expensive products into products that are simple and affordable, so many, many, many more people in society can have access to them. So perhaps the most populous example in the world today would be the simple mobile phone. Think about the proliferation of the mobile phone in the region and how that has created such prosperity for many people. It started out just as a simple, we call them feature phones or dumb phones, but now think about all the innovation and technologies that are now built on top of that phone, things that innovators did not consider 10 or 20 years ago. In terms of thinking about innovation-driven entrepreneurship, our focus really has to be on what we call non-consumption. This is the huge population of people in the region who do not have access to a particular product or a service, but whose lives would be better as a result of gaining access. If innovators can focus on this population and figure out how to leverage technology and innovation to create products that are cost-effective, simple, affordable, then what you end up doing is you create, by design, you create an ecosystem to support this new product or service. And so it's really in thinking about the types of innovation you're going to focus on, and then figuring out where you get the capital, the talent in order to make those innovations happen.
Thank you, Efosa. And I'm sure Fiona probably wants to respond. And also Layla, if you want, any of you want to intervene, please just let me know. But Fiona, and especially in light of what Efosa talked about with the different kinds of innovation, and with your experience in educating varying stakeholders on how to really build out ecosystems that can support all kinds of innovation, see those innovations thrive. You talk a lot about the importance of stakeholders, and I talk a lot about the importance of stakeholders. I've in fact represented varying stakeholders. I'm just wondering if you could also very quickly talk a little bit about in the region, if you were to give a piece of advice, especially now when we need innovation more than ever, of how varying stakeholders can more organically collaborate together and connect, what would that piece of advice be?
So Dina, thank you. Let me just take a step back and I think just lay out, as I think about innovation ecosystems, who we see the key stakeholders as being. So I think we would always argue that the entrepreneurs are absolutely sort of central and necessary. They are the most extraordinary human agents, if you like, in the system, who are the people who are often the change agents, who are kind of intervening in the system to do things in new ways. And whether they're intervening to do things in new ways around efficiency or sustaining, or as those imagining and creating new markets, I think they're very important in those roles. But a startup community, I think, is not enough without the right kinds of risk capital, the right sorts of universities or other sort of injections, if you like, of new sorts of science, technology, other sources of innovation, the government and then large corporations. If I would give advice, I think is probably particularly relevant in the region. So the first, I think, is the role of the university. I think it's really important for us to ask the question, are the universities fit for purpose for what our ecosystems, our economies are actually trying to do? You know, we need universities that are going to train the next generation of young people to be incredibly effective change agents, to have some very deep skills, whether those are skills in things like, you know, the digital economy, you know, whether they're in finance, whether they're in engineering, but we need them to have those skills not only in sort of depth, but also the breadth of understanding how to deal with people, how to work across stakeholder groups, how to have those sort of skills of diplomacy, so how to be really effective and have careers as change agents. And I think we have to ask ourselves whether our universities are always doing that, or whether they are very focused on perhaps older, more traditional models that don't give students a portfolio of skills. And they have to then lean into the ecosystem and ask the question, how can we play our part? How can we open our doors and kind of be part of the solution? And the other group, I think, is really the government. So if we take this view that there are these extraordinary potential markets of non-consumers, I mean, we've seen that, I think, during COVID, when we've looked, for example, at the provision of healthcare. And if we leave it to governments to basically tell us what to do next, we really are not going to get the healthcare that we need. It's really been you know, the private sector and entrepreneurs who've come up with new things, who've found ways of putting healthcare online, of allowing us to do much more virtual medicine and sort of moved us forward much more quickly than we might have possibly anticipated. And that, I think, shifts the government role to sometimes the provision of these services and some sort of old world system to saying, how can we provide the regulatory flexibility to provide the right guardrails to make sure that people are safe, that what they're getting is effective, but actually allow entrepreneurs and others in the system to come up with new ways of doing things. So how can we be the kind of regulatory sandbox? How can we take ideas and actually listen to how we can set the stage? I think it's much more, though, than just the simple sort of just get the basic tax regulations and things right. It actually is enabling this sort of transformation through the private sector and through entrepreneurship.
Yeah, amazing. Layla, I want to move to you because in this group, you are the entrepreneur and the innovator. After having heard what Fiona and Efosa have said, and you have your own entrepreneurial journey that has taken place here in the US, but I know that you also interact quite often with many entrepreneurs back in the Arab region. I was hoping that you could talk a little bit about your entrepreneurial journey, but also the extent to which having an ecosystem that actually works in favor of the entrepreneur, why that's important, how you've experienced that in the US versus what you see happening in the Arab region and where you think that can go.
Yeah, well, first and foremost, it's a pleasure and an honor to be speaking with you guys. While I'm the entrepreneur, I'm definitely the least, I would say, accoladed here. So what a pleasure. And to tell you about myself, I'm Layla. So I'm a co-founder at Y Systems. We provide AI-driven dispatch and routing software, and we create the perfect delivery experience. We have raised about $23 million to date. I think our team is maybe 70 people now. And it's been quite a journey. We actually came out of part of MIT that Fiona has very much helped craft and that Dina is very much a part of. So I feel blessed to have come from a place that has enabled me. So in terms of ecosystem, if we take a really big step back, while there's being part of the second wave is not a bad thing. So as I'm communicating to folks in Sharjah, in the UAE, in the Middle East, I think there are a lot of mistakes that the United States has made that you can learn from, but also a lot of good things that you can learn from. So in terms of good things, to the point Fiona made, the university has to be an enabler. Something else that has been brought up a lot has been access. When I was building a company, access meant being there with you now in person, talking to you, and suddenly with COVID, everybody's at your fingertips because the whole world went through a digital transformation 10 years too early, where we have people on our team who are based in the United States that are working out of Saudi and Tunis for the year because they don't need to be here. So suddenly I can hop on Zoom and provide mentorship, provide feedback, introduce you to VCs from anywhere in the world. So I would say that access was something that when I've been building a company has been something that was more limited, which now has expanded as a consequence of COVID. So definitely take advantage of that, learn from that, reach out to people and get them online, even if it means waking up at 1 a.m. to have that discussion, because the access that this part of our global history has brought for those hoping to build a company is remarkable and incredible. Something else which I think is really important to note as a woman and as a minority, while I guess I'm not a minority in Dubai as an Arab woman, but in the United States or in the UAE and in Abu Dhabi, in the United States, I'm very much a minority. I'm an Iraqi American. I wear hijab. 4% of venture capital in the United States goes to male and female founded teams. 2% goes to female founded teams. I fall in the first category. My co-founders are men, but really we worked against the odds, right? So I think that there's an opportunity to think about access of capital and of risk capital. Companies do better when women are also in charge. The proof is in the pudding. There's endless papers about this. I see the academics nodding their heads. Companies just do better when women play a big role. So if we think about the dynamics, who gets access to capital, how we can distribute it, and ensuring that that risk capital is truly that risk capital. 90% of it will go into the trash. 10% of it will flourish and be the next Karim. Right. So as long as you have that mentality and you enable these spaces, and for folks who are part of the second wave in these new cities that are up and coming, take advantage of the fact that I'm, one Zoom call and a mute button away. So those are a few of the tips that come to mind immediately. And the last thing that I would mention in terms of gender, which actually only dawned on me as everything went remote, was if you have reliable care for children, having the opportunity to work from home actually makes work more accessible for women in a way that it never used to be before. I used to travel all the time and I have young children, and that was the cost of having a career. Now, when I'm off, a minute later, my nanny's gone, who's a part of our pod, and I'm with my kids. So as long as you can think of how those ecosystems work, suddenly there's a lot more access to those of us who just gave up a lot more previously. So these are all ways to think about access and being inclusive.
Layla, just one quick follow-up question, and then I know we're already running short on time, and I'll end with one final question to all of you. The Arab region, and Fiona knows this, we've seen an increasing number of women entrepreneurs, and I'm sure many people who are watching this panel online today are some of the up and coming women entrepreneurs, specifically in the GCC countries like the UAE, Saudi Arabia. We see a lot of women who are specifically in tech like you. I think a lot of them would love to hear words of encouragement and advice from you to them as a leading woman in tech. Even though you built your business here, I think, there's a lot more that connects us than divides us around the world, specifically when it comes to women. We're seeing an increase in those women entrepreneurs in the region, but we're certainly not seeing that increase in capital. What would you say to women entrepreneurs watching this panel?
Absolutely. My biggest piece of advice would be, don't look for precedent. When you're starting a company, you're already working against the odds. Don't expect gender norms to work in your favor. They will not so change them the same way you're hoping to change the world with the technology you're making. Nobody else is going to pave the way for you. I have many men in my life that I absolutely adore. They're not leading the way in female, rights. They support me, but ultimately I'm the one tearing things down. And I am sure that you guys will be the ones kind of trailblazing as well. So don't look for precedent, just do it.
Completely agree. So I want to end with a question. Fiona knows this. I love to end my panels on a note of hope. And I think that this panel has highlighted different perspectives when it comes to ecosystems, different kinds of innovation, and then your personal experience, Layla, and what's like to be a woman entrepreneur. When it comes to this intersection of innovation and prosperity and truly building out more inclusive economies, which is extremely relevant to the Arab region, what are you most hopeful about moving forward? And Efosa, how about I start with you?
Yeah, I think the research we've done over the last few years has shown that at one point, virtually every country was poor. And it was through this innovation focused, driven entrepreneurship that countries were able to really go from poverty to prosperity. And in a way, that has reframed how I now think about the opportunities that exist in many emerging economies, right? And so I'm hopeful because now I know that countries that are struggling to sort of have a rung at prosperity can do it. It's a lot of work, but we don't have to wait until everything is fixed in society. You, as the entrepreneurs, are actually at the center of this prosperity that we're all looking for. So I'm hopeful about that.
Layla.
I spend a lot of time on TikTok. This is a quarantine thing.
I don't
I may have mildly,
I
I may have mildly become TikTok famous during quarantine in relationship to career advice. I have to say, I love Gen Z. Like, I'm obsessed. They're hilarious. They're sharp. They're inclusive. But also, what I've learned on TikTok, this is my only sample pool, is that it's global. Like, I follow so many Iraqi TikTokers and TikTokers all over the Middle East, and just kind of understanding their perspectives and seeing the knowledge transfer as a result of this access. For those populations who are not part of the non-consumption class, which I hope everybody who listens to this can solve problems for, to speak to Efosa's earlier point. I love Gen Z. I think you guys have it down. The access you have to each other across geographies, across boundaries is incredible. And I'm positive that you guys are going to just change things in a way that we couldn't.
Yeah, I agree. Professor Murray, final words to you.
I have a new goal, I think, although my children have wanted me to have this goal for a long time, which is to be more of a TikTok influencer. I'm not sure I'm going to be able to do that very well, but I actually.
Well, I mean, you have Layla. She can walk
I'll help you.
She's going to help me. And so I think that is part of what makes me very hopeful, is that there are these overlapping communities. And I don't even want to say generations, because that sort of implies some huge gulf between, but just, the idea that during COVID, one of the things that I think has been so powerful is that we've actually been brought together by sharing something at a very global level. And although each of our lived experiences is really different, and some of us are incredibly fortunate in the way in which we've been able to live through it and sort of have our struggles be reasonably straightforward, and others it's been incredibly traumatic. I think that has brought us together. It has caused us to find massive new ways in this crisis of doing things differently. I think the access point is incredibly profound and powerful. I think that it's also shone an incredibly bright light on issues of inequality. And whether that be around gender, around race, across countries, the urban-rural divide. And I think because we've shone a light on that in a way that is basically unequivocal, you can't say, oh, that's not true, you just haven't got the numbers right. That has allowed us to really understand what the big challenges are. And I think get way more alignment on those challenges. And I think that just opens the door first for the entrepreneurs to walk through and say, this is how we're going to change things, but then to actually get much more stakeholder alignment. And so I think because of that, that's one of the really bright lights, I think, of this global crisis, is this idea that we now have more of a shared understanding of some of these huge challenges and inequality, so that we can start to work on that together.
Yeah, could not agree more. And I just wanted to thank the three of you for being on this panel. And the Middle East is my home. Egypt is my home. I've been very privileged to see the evolution of entrepreneurship and innovation in that region over the years. And even during this past global months of the global pandemic, or this past year, we continue to see deals close. We continue to see companies IPO, amazing women who remain resilient and their companies continue to grow, venture capital funds being launched. There's so much to be hopeful about in the Arab region, and I'm really grateful that everyone in the audience here at the Sharjah Entrepreneurship Festival could get a little bit of time with each of you to hear your thoughts and areas of expertise. So thank you so much.